Well, we are continuing this subject of the healing ministry. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't start this very night and put some of these things into practice. You'll find that it would only take a few days of real practice before you would be having results. Not necessarily a few days, it could happen at once, but certainly within a few days you would be having results. Why? Healing is not difficult. Really and truly, healing itself is not difficult, regardless of the name or nature of the disease. I am sorry to say that we do not have always the fine results that we should have, but at least we know why. Disease and sin and death itself must become unreal in our consciousness. Now, strangely enough, a disease or a type of disease can become unreal in one's thought, and they might still have difficulty with another form of disease. I'll illustrate that. In the very first year of my practice, my professional practice, I was called to a case of tuberculosis. And the girl was, at that time, in the death shack. That is, a little shack that was provided for those who are expected to pass within the next day or two or three, and so that they do not disturb other patients, they are placed out here and just given a little radio. They're given good care, but they're completely isolated from other patients. And I was called to that case at that time. Well, it was a struggle right from the beginning, and it took 13 weeks of very constant work, hours and hours a day of work, before the doctors reported that there were no germs left. And it was 13 months before she left the sanatorium completely restored in her health. And although that was my first year, I'm very happy to tell you that she married a year later, and to this day writes me, every Easter, every Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving, and always the same story, that the only reason I ever go to bed is to sleep. There is no sickness, and hasn't been from that time on. Now, the struggle that I had with her and the work that I did with her in that long period of time remained so indelibly impressed in me that in all the years that have followed, I have only lost one case of tuberculosis. Every case that has ever come to me has been healed, with the exception of one in all of those years, and that's 20-odd years. Now, in the same way, for several years, I seemed to be plagued with cases of leukemia, which, of course, is incurable from the medical standpoint, and I was unable to bring out a single healing. Every one of them went their course until about 18 months ago, less than 2 years ago, when I successfully met the case of a child who was announced in the papers would be gone before Christmas, and please send it a lot of toys. Well, it's still right here enjoying toys and all the rest that goes with it. But from that day to this, I have had 4 cases, and every one has been met in less than 1 week. Now, it just so happens that in the case of tuberculosis, in the case of this, something has registered of the unreality of that situation, and they present no problems at all. Yet there are some forms of disease that still give me enough trouble so that while some are met, there are still some that are not met. That's why I say that the mere fact that we catch the unreality today doesn't mean that our problem is solved forever. This is not a simple thing. The world of disease has become a real world in the consciousness of people, and it is so deeply rooted there that even we who give our time and attention exclusively to that find some phases of difficulty in the work. If it weren't for that, we'd have all 100% healings, but we don't. Now then, the secret, and this is what I'm trying to bring out on this point, the secret is that the healings take place not through the intervention of some God. Leave God alone. His world and His kingdom is fine. But through our arrival at a state of consciousness in which the real, the spiritual, becomes real, and sin, disease, and death have no reality, and we no longer battle them, no longer try to get rid of them. Our attitude toward them is the same as our attitude toward the water on the desert after we've discovered that it isn't water, it is an illusion, a mirage. Now, as long as disease is a reality to you, as long as you believe that fevers must run their course, or that they must be brought down, or the tumors must be reduced, as long as you believe that the disease must run some kind of a physical pattern, you are not in spiritual healing, even though to some extent the spirit may be brought into the picture. For instance, we have many doctors today who will tell you that they do the treating, but God does the healing. Many of them recognize that. And there is an illustration where some measure of the spirit is brought into the work. But spiritual healing itself, complete, total spiritual healing, is this. It is non-recognition of the reality of the condition. It is a state of your consciousness or mine or the practitioner's consciousness in which God is so real, and the works of God and the Word of God and the universe of God and the man of God is so real that it's fantastic to believe that in God's world such things can be. And in not resisting the evil, the so-called evil is overcome. If we could have as much confidence in the purity of God as they had in Caesar's wife, we would all be wonderful healers. If only we would refuse to accept the belief that there is a law of God establishing sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation, we would all be miracle healers. If we could all come to a place in consciousness where we would know that regardless of what we see, hear, taste, touch, or smell, it's the water on the desert. It isn't water at all. Al Jolson saw it. It isn't raining rain at all, it's raining violets. If you can only see that destruction is no part of God's kingdom, that God has never provided for the death of a single individual. Never, never, never. If God had provided for the death of a single individual, the entire ministry of Jesus Christ is the great sin. Because never did he allow a corpse to go by him without raising it up. Never did he permit death within range of his consciousness or disease, wherever there was a chance or a possibility of reaching consciousness. All you have to do is study your New Testament and follow the life of the Master and see if he ever declared or gave any evidence that he believed that somebody was sick because they deserved it or because God thought it was time for them to die, or that it was natural. Why, even Peter's grandmother was raised from the dead. Peter's grandmother must have been kind of an elderly lady. No. There is no excuse for death at any age. There is a transition. I brought that out the other evening. There is a transition, a normal, natural one, from the worm stage to the butterfly. And undoubtedly there are progressive steps for us. But we don't have to be kicked out of our body by disease. Let's walk out of our own accord and at a time of our own choosing, not giving something power, jurisdiction, government over us. Now, the successful healing ministry is based on God as reality and the creations of God as reality, whether appearing as man or body or universe, and of the realization of the unreal nature of what is presenting itself to you as a sick person, a sinning person, or a disease, or a bad habit. When you come to the place of non-resistance through the realization that God's law is a law of life eternal. I am life eternal. That doesn't provide for death, does it? It doesn't provide for disease. Why should Jesus say, I am life eternal, if disease and death or old age were meant to come in there? Oh no. I am life eternal means what it says, that the law of God is for life. God has no pleasure in your dying. Turn ye and live. The last enemy that shall be overcome is death. Enemy. The last enemy. Enemy of whom? Enemy of God and enemy of God's man and of God's world. The last that shall be overcome because it has the deepest belief attached to it. That's why for so many years consumption and cancer have given so much trouble in the healing work, because the depth of belief lies in them, and heart trouble. The depth of belief lies in them, but they do not present difficulties to the individual who, instead of thinking through a physical healing, looks through to the kingdom of God and beholds the very living Christ as your life and as mine, and can say, my life is eternal, immortal, God maintained and God sustained forever and forever. Lo, I am with you unto the end of the world. Not just your world, but the world. Now let us understand these terms, real and unreal. Let us understand the term illusion, mirage, belief, or appearance. In other words, whatever it is that you behold, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, or smelling, learn to see it as the water on the desert, as a mirage, as an unreality, and you will immediately translate illness into health. Later, you will see that as we look even at the beautiful sights of this world, beautiful scenery, beautiful sunsets, beautiful clouds, you will see that even behind those is a reality greater in the beholder more than in the object. But once you break through just seeing the form, the externalized form as it appears, you will see even a greater thing when you see mountains and valleys and oceans and stars, suns and moons. There's more there than meets the eye, Shakespeare tells us. Indeed there is. Just as there is more to you than meets the eye, there is more to me than meets the eye. When I look out here with my eyes, I see bodies. I do not see you. When I look into your eyes, through my eyes, I see you. I behold the very soul of you. I know you as you are in God, as God made you in his image and likeness. And it is that ability to discern the reality of you that brings out healing, that lifts one up in consciousness. It's, of course, on a greater scale, much like patting a person on the back, complimenting them, and they instantly feel better. They throw their shoulders back further. It's a good thing to be complimented, to be praised. Much greater is it to look into the eye of an individual and behold the Christ of God. You lift them up right out of their human selfhood, and they don't act even as a good human anymore, much more a bad human. They really act like angels. It's true, it is true. You'll practice it in restaurants, and you'll practice it in stores, and you'll practice it on the street until the day will come when you'll say, well, what's happened to people? Aren't there any more impatient people or uncivil people? Or no, there aren't. You'll find they've disappeared out of your world, and only for one reason. They are responding to your vision of the Christ in them, and all of that is the healing ministry. Everyone responds to the practitioner's vision of the Christ in them, and they rise up to meet some measure of what the practitioner is beholding. Now that's the secret. It's as simple as all that, and I can tell you that a week or two of practice will make of anybody a healer. May take a little longer before they get into the deeper healing works, but they'll start to heal quickly, as they learn the lesson of not looking at a person, look through them. There was a time early in my practice when I found it very difficult to look at a patient sitting in my office and unsee the sin or the disease. And so I formed the habit of looking just behind their left ear. And that sort of shut them out, and I had the idea I'm looking just about at the place where the invisible God becomes visible as man. Later, I developed the knack, if you will call it that, of taking a quick glance into their eyes. Not enough to be noticeable or embarrass them, but just a quick glance, because the eyes really and truly show forth the soul. The soul shines right through the eyes, and to look back of the eyes, there sits the soul of the individual, that which you call I. That which you identify now as I, that, at least to our vision, beams right out of the eye. And when you look at that with no criticism, with no judgment, without trying to understand whether they're sick or well, or rich or poor, or sinners or saints, just look through there for the very soul of them, the God being of them, you'll find it. And in proportion as you find it, they'll find their health, and they will also find any quality of character or disposition that may have been missing. Behold the Christ in every individual. Look through them, not at them. And that's another subject. First let's meditate Now I want to bring to your attention the outstanding difference between infinite way healing, the infinite way healing ministry, and all other metaphysical systems. Because the infinite way does differ radically from all other systems. I said before that in the early days of mental and metaphysical healing, the discovery was that there was a mental cause for physical disease. Now, the early practice, and of course the first was in Christian Science, was based on that premise, that for every disease, physical disease, there was a mental cause. And in the very early days, Mrs. Eddy distributed a paper giving some of those mental causes for physical disease. Later on, she discovered that in a measure was true on that level of consciousness, but it was not true in reality. And she recalled as many of those lists as she could get her hands on, but some still remained in the hands of the public. And New Thought healing is based on that premise. New Thought healing is based on a physical disease as a result of a mental cause, and by removing the mental cause, you remove the physical disease. Now, the fact that the New Thought movement as a whole has lost about 80% of its being is testimony enough that it wasn't a correct premise. However, psychosomatic medicine is based on those original lists of Mrs. Eddy. Many of the psychosomatic doctors themselves do not know it, but those at headquarters do. They know where their lists came from. The same mental causes exist in psychosomatic medicine as existed in the early days of Christian Science and New Thought for physical diseases. Psychosomatic medicine is not a success, even as much of a success as it could be. In other words, on the physical and mental plane, there is some reason for accepting a mental cause for physical disease, but if you do, after you've discovered the mental cause for the physical disease, you have to know what to do with it, and that far psychosomatic medicine hasn't come. It knows the mental cause for many physical diseases, but it does not yet know what to do about it after it has discovered it. That I know from having taught many doctors who are in the psychosomatic medicine field. There isn't a year that I have less than 3 doctors for instruction in this work. So I usually know whereof I speak in the work that's being done in those fields. Now, even assuming that in some cases there is a mental cause for a physical disease, you are only as correct as you would be in saying that germs can produce disease. In other words, that there is such a thing as infection and contagion. Now, of course, you know as well as I do that on the physical level of life, there is such a thing as infection and contagion. But again, I'll tell you as a matter of truth that that is not true, and there isn't a metaphysician in the world of any experience who couldn't very, very quickly overcome any disease caused by infection or contagion almost as quickly as you could call for the help. almost, you may say, among the easiest healings that take place are those that are the result of infection or contagion. And the reason is this: there is absolutely no basis for accepting the belief of infectious or contagious diseases. There isn't a trace of reality to it, and the first thing proven back in the days when Materia Medica was fighting this practice was that very thing. The claim was made by Materia Medica that if metaphysical healing were legalized, that in one generation the entire population of the world would be wiped out. And the thing that would do it, of course, would be infectious and contagious diseases. Since if these were not taken care of medically, permitting them to spread would in one generation wipe out the entire population of the world. But it so happened that an opportunity was given to prove that for over a period of a year, and it was found that no case of infectious or contagious disease got beyond the person who originally had it, even when it was under metaphysical help. In other words, there had never been the spread of any disease through infection and contagion. And in my 24 years in this work, I have never yet seen an infectious or contagious disease last or spread in any household that was under metaphysical regime. Never at any time. I doubt that I could even find an exception to that rule. As a matter of fact, I went through the First World War and flu, and never saw a case lost under metaphysical treatment, although they were dying by the thousands alongside of it under Materia Medica. In the service where I was, all those who turned to metaphysical help, we not only had not one death, but we had no sickness last beyond a day or two. And of course, with some of our advanced practitioners during that war, we had the experience of entire units going without one case of flu turning up in it. So there's no question about the fact that as real as infectious and contagious diseases may be on the human or physical plane, once they are touched by the spirit, absolutely with this truth of the unreality, they are gone. And so it is with this mental cause for physical disease. Now, it may be true that you can find in Hollywood more cases of ulcer of the stomach than anywhere else because of the movie industry. That's the occupational disease. And it's due, it is said, to worry. And of course you can understand that too. It's very difficult for an adult to remain at the 12 or 13-year-old level, and if you don't remain that, you'll have a hard time turning out a successful picture. So there comes the need for holding down one's mind. However, the point really is that there is on that plane some authority for accepting a mental cause for a physical disease. Not to the extent, however, that it is done, but let us say in some measure. Here again, like infectious and contagious disease, there isn't a word of truth in it, nor can any disease, whether of physical or mental causation, not one of them can stand in the face of the understanding of the unreal nature of the disease. And so, whereas New Thought, and to some extent Unity and Christian Science, still continue to practice from the basis of a mental cause for a physical disease, we in the infinite way do not accept it any more than we accept the premise of a germ disease. Just as we have completely eliminated all consideration of germ disease, so we have eliminated all consideration of a mental cause for a physical disease, and we've done it in this wise: by taking all disease, regardless of its name or nature, all sin, regardless of its name or nature, all false appetites, regardless of its name or nature, and including them in that same category as the water on the desert. Now you know as well as I do that the water on the desert hasn't a cause. Why hasn't it a cause? There isn't any there. It has no cause and it has no effect. There isn't any there. The entire picture is illusory. We have another illustration that we use in the infinite way, and that is one that comes to us from the Orient. It is said that a man went into his bathroom in the semi-darkness and saw a coiled snake on the floor, and he became frightened. He became rigid, and the blood stopped in his veins. He couldn't move, but as he continued looking, the realization came to him it wasn't a coiled snake, it was a coil of rope. And when he saw that it was a coil of rope, his fright left him, and his blood circulated, and he became normal again. What was the cause of that snake? There wasn't any snake there. That is our attitude toward all forms of discord. Regardless of appearances, regardless of what form you see, hear, taste, touch, or smell, to you, as a student of the infinite way, must come the instant recognition that since God is the only creative principle of the universe, nothing has created this error. It can exist only as a false sense of, as an illusory sense of, as a misperception of, as a mirage. That's how your healings take place in this work. Never come down to the level of the sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. Never try to establish a cause for it, and never try to remove it, or improve it, or reduce it. The it we're talking about is the non-existent water on the desert, the non-existent snake in the rope. And as you become consciously aligned with this realization of God as the only reality, God as the only creative principle of the universe, God as the only causative principle of the universe, it is simple then to see, well then, what could have created water on the desert or the snake in the rope? Nothing could. And they never had existence. And so there's no use getting up and giving a testimony about having been healed of water on the desert or a snake in your bathroom. Neither had existence. And so for us to give testimonies to healing as if the healing really took place of the sin or disease is the same foolishness. When we speak or give testimony of healing, it is only with the understanding that you understand that the illusory appearance was dispelled and the rope was seen where the snake had appeared to be, or the road was seen where the water on the road had appeared to be. Is this becoming clearer to you? Is it?
Yes.
Not very. Well, you know, actually, we're not here to hear lectures. We're not here to hear talks. That's not our purpose in being here. This is a closed class. This is a class. And I am supposed to impart whatever unfoldment of this nature has been graciously given to me in these 24 years of practice, and some 13 years before that of study. And you are supposed to receive that impartation sufficiently to enable you to practice it, or to begin the practice of it and the living of it. As a result of this classwork, sin, disease, death, lack, limitation should become less and less real to you until eventually they fade completely out of your consciousness. But this class must result in that, or it has not given you that for which you came, nor has it given you that which I had hoped to give you. Honestly, my purpose is not just to be here to give some lectures. It is to impart a practical way of spiritual living. We have much further to go before we're through, but this evening is dedicated to the healing ministry, so that in some way you can begin with some tiny condition, if you wish, or with the greatest. It doesn't make any difference. An illusion's an illusion, whether you call it a corn or a cancer. And the sooner you get used to the idea that one is equally nothingness with the other, the sooner will you bring forth healing works. Nobody was more astonished than I was when I began with this work, to see all of these so-called incurable diseases disappearing, and to feel that in some way I had been an instrument for it. It was a shock, and it will be so to you as you have these experiences. But later you will see that it has nothing to do with you or your abilities. It has only to do with one thing: the degree in which you grasp the principle of an infinitely good creative principle and causative principle or causative law, and therefore the nothingness of that which heretofore has appeared as an evil condition. So mark this well. Healings, even spiritually, have nothing to do with churches or ministers or priests or rabbis going to a God on your behalf. Healings have to do with your individual state of consciousness. If you never were in a church in your whole life and never had planned to be in one, or you can heal in the church as well as out, but the church will have nothing to do with it, and the God of the church will have nothing to do with it. It will be your individual state of consciousness apprehending the idea of God as infinite spirit, and therefore of the universe, including man, as being infinitely and eternally spiritual. And therefore, that which appears to this world as sin, disease, lack, and limitation, as not partaking of the nature of the real, as having no law, no cause, no effect, no substance, no reality. And in proportion as that becomes active, that truth becomes active in your consciousness, will you heal. I may say this to you then, that the activity of truth in your consciousness is the healing agency. The activity of truth in your consciousness is the healing agency. Now, in your meditation, prayer, contemplation, do not take human beings into your thought, because that prevents your glimpsing the spiritual reality. Do not take human beings into your thought. Turn your thought to God. I can say this to you, that if I catch the feel of God's presence You are helped or healed whether I think of you or don't think of you, whether you're in whether I know anything about your being here. All I have to do is be conscious of God's presence, and God's presence does the work. And so with you. You do not have to think of those you would like to benefit. As a matter of fact, thinking of them will thwart you from helping them. It will thwart your activity. You must turn your attention to God until you receive that inner impulse that assures you of God's presence, and then trust it to do what we might call healing work. It won't heal anybody. It will dispel the illusion called water on the desert, or snake in the rope, or sin, disease, or death. You give your time, so far as the letter of truth is concerned, to these 2 points that I've given you tonight. That which is reality, and the constant recognition of, if you see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, and smell it, it is not according to God's law and is not maintained or sustained. And then, as you turn from that, with your listening ear, and turning your thought to the ideas of God and reality, and listening, being ever alert for the still small voice, until that influx comes, that impulse, that divine impulse that assures you God is on the field, then the healings take place. And you say, well, how isn't that funny? I wasn't ever even thinking of my child, and they got healed. You didn't have to think of your child. Your child is always in your consciousness. You couldn't get it out. And therefore, anything and everybody in your consciousness is blessed in proportion to your realization of God. Some will not accept it. Some will not turn their thought or permit their thought to go to God. That, of course, has nothing to do with you. You can't help them if they don't want to help. Sometimes you can in spite of themselves, but as a general rule, it is their desire, their bringing themselves to you, that forms the perfect contact. As a result of these 2 hours tonight, it is possible that questions will come to your thought, more especially those of you who have not had experience in this form of healing. To me, of course, I can't see how a question can remain. Perfectly clear to me. But there may be questions in your thought, and if so, please, tonight will be a good time before you retire to write them out and bring them in with you tomorrow, and let us clear up anything, because out of this week I really hope to hear of some good healing work begun by this group. It isn't that healing is the aim and object of our life. Oh no, life has many beautiful facets. But healing is an evidence of your degree and mine of God realization. We'll only heal in the degree of our God realization, and that God realization is more than a healing agency. It really is a presence that goes before us to make all the crooked places straight. It really does go before us to prepare mansions for us. It makes our whole human existence harmonious and joyous and fruitful. You say, how can that be in a world so full of turmoil? You'll be surprised how rapidly you grow above it and indifferent to it. In the same way that you grow indifferent to the person who willfully and intentionally wants to go on robbing or stealing or drinking, you say, well, it's your life, brother. You have to make the best of it until you awaken, and you come to the point where you will see that the world will have to wake up. Just having someone come along and make it happier in its ignorance and dishonesty is not going to solve the world's problems. And so it would be just as well for it to go on, even if it has to crack up a few times, and awaken to the fact that there is no permanent solution to harmonious living than God living, spiritual living. And that means a living not of getting, but of giving, a life of sharing, a life of outpouring. And you will find that on your path you will find those to whom you can pour out and who will receive that which you have to give. And that will be sufficient joy for one lifetime. It is like our friend Peter. When the beggar asks for money, and Peter responds, "Silver and gold have we none. Such as I have give I unto thee. Rise, pick up thy bed and walk." And the man did. And there was satisfaction in the life of Peter and John, even if thousands of others were not healed, who were still looking to their ignorance and sins. And so with us, it is an utter impossibility for us to go out on a street corner and tell this truth that we are hearing this week, a truth that cannot help but bring more happiness, contentment, peace, health, and prosperity to those who listen. It can't help it. And yet we cannot go out on a street corner. Well, we'd be ignored. You know that as well as I do. Only those prepared, only those who are touched by the Spirit are prepared for the spirituality. If so be the Spirit of God dwell in you, then are you the children of God. And so it is that you will find, as I am finding, that among those who are receptive and responsive to the Word of God, I live and move and have my being and my joy and my pleasure and my profit. And the rest of the world, I can only pray, "Awake, thou that sleepest, and let Christ give thee light." Thank you. Thank you.